This is the Hoff Time Report with Idaho Freedom Foundation President Wayne Hoffman, one of Idaho's most respected, influential public policy voices.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It's good to be back here today with Chloe Cole, who's had kind of a whirlwind since getting into Idaho. Gave a speech last night in Caldwell and a speech at the Capitol this morning and talking to legislators. I hate to introduce you as a detransitioner, but you introduce yourself that way. And there's more to you than that, I presume. Why don't you tell our audience just a little bit more about your story and who you are?
So I'm Chloe Cole, and I'm a detransitioner from the Central Valley of California. I'm 18, and I am biologically female, but at the age of 12, I started socially transitioning and eventually medically transitioning, starting with puberty blockers and testosterone at the age of 13, a double mastectomy at 15, and then I stopped transitioning at 16.
What was it that was going through your head at that time, at age 12 and age 13?
Well, I think in order to get into that, I have to get into my childhood before that. I'm the youngest child in my family, and both my parents are in the picture. But I'm also autistic. I'm on the spectrum, and I've always struggled because of that, and with like my organization and like my grades in school, and also because of and also with socializing with my peers, and I have a lot of siblings, but not all of them were in the house because they're all half siblings, and some of their parents had more custody than mine, and there's also a significant gap between me and most of my siblings. They're about 7 to 8 years older than me, so there's kind of a bit of difference in maturity and interests, or at least there was growing up. But I found myself feeling quite lonely growing up because of this, and I've always been kind of on the tomboyish side.
What does that mean? So I heard you say that last night, and I've watched you, followed you on Twitter for a long time, and I've never really fully understood what constitutes like your feeling like a tomboy, whatever that means.
Well, for me personally, it's mostly just being like, because my brothers, I've always had an interest in video games and comics and cartoons and stuff like that. But I'm kind of on the nerdy side, and I like being in the outdoors. And I really used to like wearing boys' clothes all the time and having short hair. It's all kind of stereotypical, but I felt like in a deeper way I connected more with the boys and men around me, and I liked them more than I like being around them and speaking with them, and more than I did with the girls and women I knew. And I had a sense of humor that was more similar to theirs than that of the girls.
When was the first time that you felt that you were in the wrong body, I guess, as they like to say, I guess now? Gender dysphoria. Before
that, I went into puberty really early. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I was very quickly, at a very young age, conscious of my body, especially because I would put up with comments from my peers and sometimes adults. And I was also using a lot of social media, so I would see like these very idealized images of young women, and I would compare myself a lot to these pictures and to the girls who I knew in real life, and I often felt like I just wasn't pretty, that I would never be enough as a girl.
And so, did you have a conversation with your parents or with a doctor or a counselor or something?
No, I didn't really feel like I was close enough to anybody to really talk about this, and I felt kind of ridiculous for feeling this way too. I didn't know that it was I didn't know at the time that it was actually a pretty common experience, not only for girls but also for boys that age.
So what was the first? When was the first time when somebody said, "Oh, you're trans" or something like that? I guess was that the expression that was used?
No. Well, nobody said that to me. I was the one who made this decision, but at roughly the same time I started using social media, I also started to see a lot of like content from mostly like left wing in nature stuff, like feminist content and especially like LGBT content. And most of that content, I mean, a lot of it started mostly with like, because I liked cartoons and stuff. I would follow communities about things like that online, and for some reason there seemed to be like an overlap between fans of the stuff I liked and young adults and teens who identified as transgender. And eventually the algorithm shifted and I started seeing more LGBT focused content, and it was mostly young girls, and a lot of them identified as like non-binary or as boys, and a lot of them were very similar to me. A lot of them were pretty awkward and very tomboyish from a young age, and often felt like they weren't really accepted by their peers, but they struggled into becoming more accepted, seemingly by their families and their friends, and it touched me that these people who were quite like me found their own sense of community.
So, was this on Facebook, TikTok, some other application, some other platform?
Yeah, TikTok wasn't really a thing when I first started transitioning. It was Instagram mostly.
Instagram. And so after you start using the platform, the algorithm sort of shifts and you start seeing more of this stuff is basically what happens.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible. I mean, that's happening right now. I hear that's happening quite a bit on TikTok. That's why I kind of wanted to know if there was if TikTok figured prominently into it. But I guess that was before.
Yeah.
So the you must have had a conversation with somebody at some point that led you to a doctor's office.
Yeah, so I started like cutting the hair shorter and getting more clothing from the boys section. And at first I don't think it was very noticeable to my parents because they're used to me wearing boys' clothes sometimes, and I didn't like wearing girls' clothing.
Right.
And it wasn't until I told them that they had an idea about it, and they weren't exactly sure to react. Like they were cautious. They wanted to make me feel comfortable and supported and loved.
Do you remember the conversation?
I actually wrote this down in the letter.
Oh.
Because I was afraid. I didn't know how they were going to react. I wanted to allow them some time to think it over, and like I knew even then that it would be kind of shocking. So I wanted to just let them think about it for a bit.
What did you do? You remember what you said? What did you tell them?
The gist of it was just like, well, I want to be your son. I want you guys to call me by this name and as a boy.
You had a name picked out.
Yeah, and I switched between a few names before I eventually settled on the name Leo.
Was there a reason for that?
Well, it's kind of lazy, but I was born in late July, and that made me
clever.
Astrologically,
That's
Leo.
not clever. More
But
clever.
it also, I mean, it's three letters out of my birth name, and I wanted it to be similar to my birth name, so.
And your parents eventually accepted this notion?
Yeah, they struggled for about a year and a half. I would hear from other people like, "Hey, why does your dad keep saying he and she at once?"
Oh.
I understand now that it must have been really hard, especially to do that with your own kid. But they thought of it as a mental health issue. Like, we need to get this checked out and get to the bottom of this. And so they brought me to the therapist.
How long were you into the process at that point? You went to the therapist.
I'd say, I mean, I was still socially transitioning. It wasn't until I'd say about 6 months after I got diagnosed with gender dysphoria when I started the medical route, and that started with puberty blockers and then testosterone just a month after I started the blockers.
How many doctor's visits did you have, or how many therapy sessions did you have before you started on puberty blockers?
Not enough.
Really? I mean, was it one or two, or was it? I mean,
about that much, yeah.
Really?
The first endocrinologist I was referred to for hormones and blockers was actually hesitant to put me on them because he was concerned about how it would affect my brain development and just about my age in general. The interesting thing is, I recently looked at my files, and apparently that endocrinologist is no longer with my healthcare provider.
Oh.
So that means he either dropped out or he was fired, and I'm assuming it's because of stories like mine.
And how were you feeling after you started the puberty blockers?
Not the greatest. After about 2 weeks, I'd say. Once the hormones were cleared out of my body, it kind of made me feel just a little bit depressed. I didn't have nearly as much energy, and I also started experiencing some menopausal symptoms because it basically was an artificial menopause. I had already been about 3 or 4 years into puberty by this point, so all of a sudden my body just didn't have sex hormones, and I started getting like hot flashes and itching all over my body.
Wow. Did that last a long time?
It lasted for about the duration that I was on the blockers, which was about like a year to a year and a half. I had 3 or 4 shots in total, I think.
Was there a point during this process when you were happy that you were on puberty blockers and you were being called Leo and your hair was short, you were wearing boys' clothes?
Yeah, so I was on the blockers alone for about a month, and I was basically just waiting for the next big step, which was testosterone. And once I started on it, it was like I finally had hormones back in my body that was devoid of them, and because it was testosterone, I mean, naturally it felt great. Like I had my energy back, and I was just happy.
I had read that there was sort of this euphoria of starting either estrogen or testosterone that makes people feel happy. That sort of this brings about this rush of energy, and they feel really good about things they didn't feel good about before. Is that where you were?
Yeah, that's how it was for a while. With pretty much every step, from little things to like getting my hair cut short for the first time, and wearing like a full outfit of boy clothes to eventually starting on testosterone, and then later on undergoing a mastectomy. And there was a bit of a honeymoon period with each of those, but eventually the happiness went away. And so for a while it took a while for me to figure out where the distress really was from.
You still felt
where
distress?
The problem was. Well, after a while of being on testosterone, the magic started to go away. I'd say maybe like a year or so after.
What do you mean? What did that look like, or what did it feel like?
Well, I feel like it's partly directly because of testosterone, and indirectly because I started to look more like a boy, sound like a boy, fit in more with the boys, and be treated as one of them, and that felt good. And sometimes there would be like girls who had crushes on me, and although I wasn't really interested in women, it just was kind of an ego boost. It was like, well, somebody finally likes me, I'm being recognized.
That's an interesting point, because I had my own experiences in cross-dressing and stuff like that, and I found that there was a certain level of, and I was looking for a word, and I thought the word was validation, which is when somebody looks at you and they say, oh, you look pretty, or they use she and her pronouns when they talk about you, or things like that. That there's a sense of validation that comes with that.
Yeah, and it didn't come until I was in high school. I mean, I started transitioning both socially and physically while I was in middle school. I didn't get the nicest reaction, just because in middle school, when you're the odd one out and when people start noticing something wrong is going on, they're not very nice about it. But by the time I was in high school, I looked and sounded like a boy, and nobody other than people I went to middle school or elementary school knew about it, and they all just thought I was like any other boy my age.
So, when did you realize that you had made a mistake?
It wasn't until I had the surgery that I started having negative feelings. When I got home from the surgery, and it was actually an outpatient surgery, so they sent me home pretty much as soon as I was conscious.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. I feel like I should go more into that. I was born with a cleft palate, actually, and I had 2 revision surgeries, one when I was about 1 or 2 years old, and the next one was when I was about 13. So, because it wasn't the artificial palate they made for me wasn't growing with the rest of my skull, so they had to do another revision. And for that surgery, I would say it's a lot more simple than the surgery I got as part of my transition. I don't know exactly how it works, but they had me stay in the hospital for about 3 days afterward. But when they took my breast away and they used skin grafts as part of the operation, they just sent me home as soon as possible.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did they take the grafts from other parts of your body?
No. Sorry about this. This is gonna get a little bit graphic.
That's
I'm
all
sorry
right.
about that, but so the most common incision type they use is it's called a double mastectomy with nipple grafts, and that means they actually take the top of the areolas, the excised around it, they take them off, and they scrape an area of the skin on the chest, and they graft the areolas onto that area. So it's pretty brutal, probably something you would see in Nazi era Germany.
Wow. That's quite a statement. And they're still doing it that way, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, they sometimes do this in patients with breast cancer, but the problem is, in this case, it's not medically necessary. Like, these are perfectly healthy patients.
But you didn't. Did you after you got done? You got home. You look in the mirror and you didn't look at yourself and say, "This is what I've always wanted."
Well, there was a bit of time between doing that and doing the surgery because I couldn't bathe or take off my bandages for about a week after that. But once the day I got my stitches taken out was kind of the first slap in the face from reality. It was oh my gosh, this feels horrible because the area was numb, but I could still feel everything, and it made me physically sick. And then when I got home and I was able to bathe again, and I had to take off my dressings every night and just look at this area, this battlefield on my body.
That's incredible. And I mean, I don't know how to ask this question except just to ask. So, do you still feel or look scarred? I mean, do you still have those stains? Have you been able to recover any of that, or have any work done to fix that?
Yeah, the scars are still there, but the problem is the grafts should have been healed by about a year and a half maybe. But when about 2 years after the surgery, I started having complications arising from it. Initially, the grafts were healing relatively well. They weren't really pigmenting over as they should have, but they were kind of dry. The skin was kind of dry, but other than that, I thought it was going fine. But then all of a sudden, 2 years later, the grafts just started leaking fluid.
Really?
And the skin on top is just not healing at all. And I've had to go back to wearing bandages on my chest. I stopped doing that about 3 months after the surgery, and now I'm back to square one, and I have no idea what's going on with it.
So you mean you're still in this space where you're having to have more reconstructive work done, or more?
I have no idea. I've tried to reach out to my surgeon, to report that I regretted the surgery, and also just to tell him I'm having some pretty serious complications, and I got no help. He was just, all I could get was a call with him, and he was really dismissive, really rude the whole time. And
why is that?
I don't know.
I mean, it's like if I had a nose job done, there was something wrong with my nose, they'd probably come back and try to fix that or make you happy in some kind of way, right?
I'm not really sure. Maybe he's afraid of a lawsuit, which one is coming up. But his advice was just keep bandaging it, but also put Vaseline on it, which didn't. He said it was to keep the area moist, which didn't make sense because it already was, and it isn't supposed to be at this point. And I was like, well, this doesn't really make sense, but I guess I'll do it. And then I did, and I got a skin infection from the advice of my own surgeon.
Wow. That's really tough. That's really rough. I don't know how to even react to that. I mean, it sounds like do you trust the medical advice that you're getting at all?
Nope. I'm gonna have to go outside of my provider, which will be really expensive.
So, okay, you went through the surgery, you did the puberty blockers, you went through the surgeries, surgery, I should say. You didn't have multiple surgeries, exactly, right? But at what point did you kind of think to yourself, this is crazy, I've made a horrible mistake?
Yeah. For a little while after the surgery, I started realizing, like, wow, I miss some little things about being a girl, like just like wearing makeup and just being pretty and stuff like that. I mean, by this point in time, I had been on hormones for a few years, and my breasts were gone. I did not look like a girl.
Were you growing facial hair? Did you have
A
your
little
muscular?
bit, but I would shave it. It wasn't enough to like actually like grow it out, but I didn't really care to. But like I had like a little bit of muscle in my body. My face was very masculine. Like I looked like a boy my age, just a little shorter than average. But I also realized like I missed some of the social benefits of being a female that I didn't even realize were there. But I just felt like I didn't have as much room to talk like about my emotions or my hardships as a guy, and my relationship were a lot less emotionally fulfilling. The thing that what really put things together though was just all it was just taking a psychology class and just learning about like the human mind, parenting, and um, child development. Like I was taking a psychology class in my junior year online, and it was the first time that I really thought about anything like that in depth, and I realized like I'm not going to be able to breastfeed my kids, and that's like a huge part of being a mother.
No one ever stopped you and said, hey, if we do a double mastectomy, you're never going to be able to breastfeed.
Oh yeah, I was told that, but I didn't know
you,
the importance of that because I was so young.
I mean, obviously, why would you think about that? You wouldn't imagine yourself as a 25-year-old woman breastfeeding a child.
Yeah.
It wasn't in your top list of things to do.
Yeah, I had schoolwork to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so you realize that you've made a terrible mistake, and now, how did you get to the place where you decided to speak out about this, and how have you been received by the LBGTQ, various other letters community?
The alphabet club.
The alphabet.
It took quite a while actually. I started talking about like my regret online and with some of my friends, and I got shut down pretty quickly by some people. Most people just didn't know what to say, but some others were very aggressive about it, especially some of my transgender friends at the time. There already was a bit of jealousy because most of them, none of them that I knew actually that I can remember had been transitioned medically as young as I was, and they wish they had parents who would let them do the same. And so when I stopped, when I regretted it, they got really bitter, and they would say things like, "Well, you should have known what you were doing to yourself, and you don't deserve parents who let you do this."
Wow. Why do you suppose they did that?
Jealousy and also fear. Like seeing somebody so advanced in the process, and they still were wrong about a choice that you also want to make, has to be terrifying.
Have you in your conversations, are you coming across people who are actually gender dysphoric, who you think, oh my gosh, yeah, you definitely need to have some puberty blockers. You definitely need to.
Well, that's not the approach I would take with it. Like I see people who have dysphoria, but I also see these. I can see where it stems from. Like pretty much every trans person I met has like some really severe trauma, like either sexually or having to do with their family, and they all have some sort of comorbidity, like depression or social anxiety or like a personality disorder or something along those lines. But I'm gonna go back to the question you asked earlier about how I got to this point. So I stopped speaking to my friends about this for a while, just because I didn't want to be being treated the way I was. But excuse me. I also started reaching out online to like support groups for detransitioners, and I found out that there's a lot of people who are in the situation as well. And at the time, the people I was talking to mostly were adults, but I knew there had to be a lot more kids like there are me, like me.
Are there
But
that many?
we don't know yet. I mean, there's been like a huge wave of detransitioners speaking out. After I started speaking out, when I first started speaking out, it was mostly like adults, people who transitioned as adults. But I've had quite a few people reach out to me who transitioned as minors, like I did.
How young?
There was one person I can think of who transitioned about a year younger than I did. During the year before, I think she was about like 12 or 11 when she started.
That's shocking. Do you think what do you think is driving this interest in? As I like I said, I never imagined that there would be a time when this was just on the tips of everyone's tongues, and you see it everywhere, and then here we are. Suddenly, it's. I remember having a conversation with a high school teacher in Moscow, Idaho, and he told me that he's got a class of 30 kids, and 4 of them consider themselves trans, and that's outside the norm. More than 10% of the kids in the class are trans. That seems implausible. How does that happen?
I mean, I see a lot of these kids. I see a lot of myself in these kids. A lot of them have, a good amount of them actually, anywhere from upwards of 30% of these kids are on the spectrum, and a lot of them they have body image issues or depression, issues with self-harm or like eating disorders. A lot of them have been abused, physically, emotionally, sexually, and they're often not very popular in school. They don't really have, a lot of them don't really have a lot of friends. They don't fit in very well, and another pattern I've seen amongst these kids is that a lot of them aren't really very active in like any sports or like any like clubs or extracurricular activities, and they're just not really going outside. They're not really involved in their communities. They're just like, they're kind of nerdy like I was, just kind of like staying, but they're like kind of like staying inside, or like they're almost shut-ins a lot of the time, or they're just addicted to social media. On a larger scale, though, it seems to be motivated by money. I feel like that's the biggest motivator here, because
But whose money?
Politicians, pharmaceutical companies, and especially the surgeons. The surgeries are pretty lucrative, but you probably heard that European countries are starting to put a halt on this for children.
Yeah.
But the U.S. is just not stopping anytime soon.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's due in part because the U.S. in a lot of ways is motivated a lot more by money, but it's also very ideological.
It's just strange, and I guess a little scary, again, for me, because I just know what would have happened. I'm obviously a lot older than 51, and you were a tomboy. I was quite the opposite of that, and I read an article the other day on what they call transmaxing. Have you heard of that?
Oh gosh,
transmaxing. Yeah. Do you want to explain transmaxing? So I don't have to.
No, I have to explain this.
I can, I guess.
I can.
I'll try my best. So the transmaxing essentially is, here are all the benefits to being trans, especially like, for example, if you're a boy and you really, maybe you are an outsider and you're introverted.
Never been on any dates.
Never been on
never
any
had
dates.
success with women.
Yeah.
I've heard the phrase like, if you can't get a girlfriend, just become the girlfriend.
You can be the girlfriend.
Just become your dream girl.
Yeah, you can do that.
That's pretty terrifying.
You'll have softer skin, and you'll have beautiful features, and you can wear the pretty clothes that you can't otherwise have any access to, and yeah, transmaxing. And so it's shocking to me because, like I said, I could have easily gone. I would have easily, if I were born in this time and space. There's no doubt in my mind that somebody would have come up to me and said, "Well, clearly you're transgender, and here are some pills to stop your hormones, and then you can be exactly what you desire." That's autogonophilia, and
Yeah.
so you will be this. You will be the thing that you desire. Is basically what that looks like.
Yeah.
And that terrifies me that there are kids who are going through that and they don't really know what that is. And then they're being presented with this list of things that make them that they would you would read the list and you go, oh yeah, softer skin, beautiful appearances. I guess if you're a boy, boobs.
The grass is always greener on the other
Yeah,
side.
and but the way it's presented is it's extraordinarily compelling. And now you're being told, you're 12 years old, 13 years old, or whatever it is. Don't worry because your life is going to be so much better.
Yep.
Once you do this thing, and then you have doctors that will go along with it.
Even as somebody who's been through it, it's just insane to see that we've gotten to this point.
And the medical community, we call this a gender affirmation.
Yeah.
Your gender
affirming care.
There's something wrong with you, and we're going to provide you care that affirms your actual gender.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on here? What is this? Is it really just money?
Money, ideology, and insanity.
So what is your prescription for solving this problem? What would you do if you could wave a magic wand?
The 3 H's: hikes, hugs, and hobbies.
You just need to be
need to be active. Just need to be doing something, staying busy, and keeping yourself just focusing on something.
Is that what our kids are just missing that these days? They're wrapped up in social media. They're staring at their phones all day long.
Yeah,
the algorithm validates their feelings.
Yeah, and parents aren't really being active as they should be.
You mean in censoring or monitoring what their kids are accessing?
Well, yeah, but also a lot of parents, a lot of people my age feel like they're not as close to their parents as they want to be, even like subconsciously. And it's true, a lot of parents just are so focused on things like work now that they're not really taking time to spend with their family, their kids, and just being involved like they should in their lives.
And then they seek out sort of a replacement, which might be, it's kind of the same thing that happens with kids in gangs.
Yeah.
We've heard for years, if family's not involved, and kids find a way to find a new family, they'll join a gang or whatever.
Yeah, a lot of this is a symptom of the same exact problem.
Wow. So here you are, you're traveling the country, you're getting to speak in front of a lot of groups. You're obviously, I think, you're making a difference. Do you feel that? Do you have, you wouldn't be here if not for, this horrible thing that's happened to you. But what do you think that's about?
Yeah, I think there's definitely silver lining to it. And as horrible as it is that it happened, I think it's for a good cause. And I've been able to use what I've learned and to use my account of my own experience for good.
Where do you go from here? What do you do next? Is this going to be your life, advocating on behalf of detransitioners or kids that might be transitioned without realizing what they're doing?
I hope one day that I don't have to talk about this issue anymore, that it'll resolve. A lot of people call me like an anti-trans grifter, promoter of hatred of LGBT people, but it's not true.
Well, I heard you last night, and you were very sympathetic or empathetic with regard to people who are in that spot. It is not an easy place to be.
I've been through it.
It's confusing and it's difficult, and you're seeing, these people around you who you have an admiration for, and you want to be like them. and then you feel left out. You're not the same as the other boys or the other girls, and that can be very challenging.
That's the problem.
What is?
I mean, there's all these people, all these young people, these kids, and even adults, and this is what we consider the standard of care for them. What I really want is a better standard of care for patients who have distress related to their gender or their biological sex. And people often say, like, oh, you want to, they say I'm like contributing to a genocide of transgender people. But that's not what I want at all. In fact, I don't want there to be detransitioners. I want there to be people who, if they do decide to transition, I want them to be happy with their choice. But I don't want there to be people who are harmed by this, who regret it, and have to live with it for the rest of their lives.
That's a good way to say it. Any other thoughts on this topic or advice for other parents and kids out there watching?
Well, if you're a parent watching this, first of all, let your kids know that you love them, and just be as active in their lives as you can. Just spend time with them and watch over them and give them guidance.
What about
keep them active in school and in sports and clubs and with their community and people, especially of their own age.
Let them know they're beautiful just the way they are.
Yes.
What about
There's nothing that they have to change about themselves physically. It's all in the mind.
What about policymakers? What do you have to say to them? People that are writing the legislation that either allows or protects these kinds of procedures, or maybe even in some way tries to ban them.
This is never appropriate for children, and it should not be legal for use in children. I think that adults who are fully informed and mentally healthy enough to be able to make a decision like this, if nothing else has worked out, then they should have every right to do this, but keep the kids away from this.
Very good. I can't add anything to that. And I really appreciate you coming out to
Thank
Idaho.
you.
I really do. You've done an amazing job, and you've got a lot more courage in your pinky than a lot of some of the politicians out there. So I'm really honored to be in your presence and to have you here today.
It was a pleasure.
And thank you all for tuning in today. We'll be back again for another Hoff Time report. Thanks. See you later.
You've been listening to the Hoff Time Report with Wayne Hoffman. Be sure to visit idahofreedom.org for Wayne's articles, IFF research, and show notes from today's episode.